Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, and welcome to today's webinar, AI in the Classroom, Practical Strategies to Enhance Learning and Protect Academic Integrity, presented by the Association of College and University Educators, ACUE. I am Alyssa Koff. I'm the Senior Digital Marketing Manager at ACUE. And for those who are less familiar with our work, um, ACUE partners with higher education institutions to deliver excellence in every classroom through a complete faculty development ecosystem, including the only nationally recognized certification in effective teaching that is endorsed by the American Council on Education. For today's webinar, we'll explore practical, actionable strategies for integrating AI tools responsibly into teaching and learning. We have gathered some excellent panelists who will explain why AI matters in higher education today, discuss ethical standards for AI use, and also share how to implement responsible AI practices in the classroom. By the end of this webinar, you will be able to set clear policies, communicate expectations, and apply AI in ways that enhance rigor and engagement on your campus and in your classrooms. And before we dive in, I just want to do a little housekeeping. First of all, you're welcome to use the chat to communicate with one another and comment on discussions or share your ideas. But if you have questions for the panel, please pop those into the Q&A rather than the chat. When possible, we'll address some of those questions during the conversation. And we have set aside some time at the end, though, to get to the ones that we aren't able to talk about during the conversation. So, with that said, I'd like to introduce our host for today, Lori Pendleton. Lori is the Vice President of Faculty Success at ACUE. She is joined by an amazing panel who will discuss the importance of AI and how to use it responsibly in higher ed. So, Lori, I will let you lead from here. Let me just, there she is. Hi, Lori.
Hey, thank you and welcome everyone. And thank you, Alyssa. And I'm up here in Maine where we got almost 2 feet of snow. It just kept snowing and snowing, but over the weekend it was below zero and today it's 18. So we're going in the right direction. And those of you who live in Florida, it's not fair, just not fair. But as my father used to say, if you can't take the winters, you don't deserve the summers. So very happy to be here. And I'm so glad that you have chosen to join us today for this very important topic on talking about AI in education. And joining me today, we have Flower Darby, the Associate Director for Teaching and Learning at Teaching for Learning Center at the University of Missouri. Dr. Michelle Miller, Professor of Psychology, Psychological Sciences, and the Co-Executive Director of the Institute for Advancing Applications of AI at Northern Arizona University. And if you're anything like me, you do a lot of reading of Dr. Miller's work. She always has interesting takes and approaches. And also joining us is Dr. Stephanie Spiker, who just recently joined ACUE as an academic director, and she is out in Utah where they got no snow, which is a little interesting and unusual. And of course, we have Patty West, who is the Senior Director of Global Customer Engagement at Turnitin. So welcome to the panel, and you may want to, if you're listening in, start thinking about some questions that you might have for them. So let's begin by talking about one of the biggest shifts happening across higher education right now, and that's the rapid expansion of artificial intelligence and what it means for our students, our teaching, and our institutions. It is here to stay. A couple of, not that long ago, a year maybe, we was, well, I don't know what role it's going to play. Now it is here, and it is no longer a niche tool. It's embedded in all of the platforms students and we use every day: writing supports, research assistants, tutoring bots, accessibility tools, search engines, productivity apps. AI is increasingly becoming part of the learning ecosystem. And because of that, educators are now in a critical position of really trying to help students understand when, how, and why AI should be used responsibly. There really are lots of opportunities and associated risks with AI. Some of the real opportunities are that it can definitely personalize support and streamline instructional prep and routine tasks. One of my favorite things to use AI for is to create a rubric, an incredibly time-consuming task. Drop the assignment in and say, make me a rubric. And it works really well and takes time that we can now give back to our students. And it can also increase access for learners who benefit from translation, text to speech, or even scaffolding tools. I recently broke my wrist and have been relying very heavily on an app called Willow Voice that has allowed me to continue working and communicating with everyone in all the apps. And that has been incredibly helpful for me. There are also huge challenges that we have. One of those is navigating integrity and preventing misuse, over-reliance on AI. When students, the use of AI really starts to interrupt what we like to start calling learning integrity, not just academic integrity. Making sure that we're ensuring access to equity and access and our expectations that students have equal access to the tools and resources, and really addressing students' mixed emotions. Some of them are incredibly excited about using AI. Others are concerned about unclear rules or being accused of using AI incorrectly. So our goal today is to explore both sides of this landscape, the promise and the responsibility. And what we hope that you'll gain from this session is a clearer understanding of student perspectives on AI. Why do they want transparency and guidance from faculty? Why many feel anxious about false accusations or inconsistent rules across courses. We want to really talk also about a framework for creating clear, ethical, and student-centered AI policy and why they matter for matters of fairness and consistency. And we want to talk about how we can use AI to support lesson planning, feedback, and accessibility. So we're really excited to share these insights with you and hope that you'll leave today feeling informed, confident, and equipped to navigate AI in your teaching context. And again, welcome and thank you for joining us. So let's begin by talking about students' perceptions regarding their use of AI. Panelists, Patty, you want to take that about how students feel about the use of AI?
I'll jump in quickly here if I could. Greetings and thank you to everybody who's making time to watch, be here live or watch a recording. We know that the student experience is extremely mixed, right? We know that some students are taking advantage of these tools and offloading their cognitive work. We know that, but there's a whole lot of students who object to the use of AI, who worry about the future that they see in front of them, who are worried about the job market. We know that students are experiencing significant fear and anxiety about being falsely accused of using AI when they did the work for themselves. So I don't think we can say exactly, broadly speaking, how students are feeling. I think we can say there are a lot of feels, and students are looking for that guidance from us.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that, Flower. You did a great job of covering that. There's certainly not one set of emotions that students are feeling. I think of it as a very wide range. And frankly, some students may feel different depending on the moment and the circumstances that surround what's happening there. You get students who have concerns about instructors and educators using AI and then have concerns about themselves and false accusations at the same time that they're worried about unfair competition and being held up to other students who are using AI tools permissibly or not. So it really is quite a wide range. I mean, we are even seeing environmental concerns, right? So it is a wide range, but I think the important part is to recognize that there are, to your point, Flower, very strong feelings and that you can't assume that every student feels the same way. I think if you start with that concept and then take the time to assess what those feelings are, depending on where you are in the moment, and respond to that very wide diversity, I think that's really the critical piece, is recognizing that there are feelings and that students are a stakeholder in this conversation. By acknowledging that they have these strong feelings, I think it puts educators in a position of saying, we recognize that you have a voice in this conversation too. It shouldn't, whatever we're doing with AI in education, it shouldn't be done to students. There should be a collaboration, there should be a two-way communication that is happening there. Later, we'll talk about policy, for example. Students should have a voice in driving policy as well. Not necessarily the only voice, obviously, but they should certainly be recognized as a stakeholder there. So I think that recognition is the place to start.
Point. Thank you so much for sharing. So given that those are all the feels that the students are coming to this experience with, how can setting clear standards or providing a framework for policies and expectations, how can that help students and faculty feel more comfortable with what's going on in their classes and the conversation around the use of AI?
I want to throw that to Michelle because you have some really smart things to say on that topic. I'd love to hear from you.
No, I think I want to hang back on that one for just one moment.
Okay.
Well, I'll jump in.
Please
I
do.
have some thoughts, and we have some folks from my team who are going to be sharing some resources as well. And it's interesting because Turnitin has this global presence, and so we're sometimes asked what policies should be, and that's a thing that we're never going to tell you. And part of the reason we're never going to tell you is because there isn't one right answer. It should be a collaborative process. It should involve stakeholders, educators, students, different departments, different verticals, leaders, industry folks, right? All of these people have a voice in the conversation. So there isn't one right answer to what the policy should be. And even if an institution sets a policy, within that policy, there can be room for a range of what is acceptable use and what is not. When we talk to educators, one of the things that we hear from them is that I don't have the same policy as my colleague, right? And that's okay as long as it is very clearly communicated to students what the policy is in a particular context. I would argue that even within a single course, I may have different acceptable use for different assignments, right? So I think when we talk about setting policy, it doesn't mean that there is one right answer. And certainly, if there is one right answer, none of us know it today. It's too early in the conversation, and it is continuing to evolve as the technology evolves. But certainly, we have to start the conversation somewhere. Long before I worked at Turnitin and when I was an educator in the field myself, one of the things I always said is that if you leave it up to students to derive for themselves what is and isn't acceptable. If you don't communicate it, you can assume that they will not come to the same answer that you would have come to. So it is really important to make sure that it is a communication, whether that's at the institutional level, department level, instructor level, assignment level, right? So all of those pieces are important.
And I'll go ahead and please, Michelle.
Oh, with that framing, that's what I really think is important to have front and center, what Patty's mentioned. A few kind of, more kind of fine tuning of that and some directions to take it in. I'm going to be a little, I don't know how controversial this will be with this group, but I'll tell you one policy approach that I've kind of gently pushed back against, and I did that in a recent Substack post. Is a red light, green light, yellow light. And I'm sorry, again, if folks are big fans of that, but because one of the issues is what is a green light? I mean, there's never a total, oh, whatever you want to do. We're educators and we do need to engage students, and there are always going to be parameters around that. But as has been emphasized here, taking that, okay, we're going to address it. I think that's a reasonable policy suggestion is everybody has to say something about it and has to make it as clear as possible. But then I think another really good pivot, if it's not going to be a very simplistic, like, well, do whatever you want, or maybe, maybe not, or no AI whatsoever. If it's not going to be that, this is where I think, as in so many aspects of AI, a productive starting point for faculty is the discipline. If I just don't know what is reasonable use, well, I remind myself I'm not addressing AI in general. I'm addressing AI and its role for my future students. And I'm not in charge of their whole education, their whole life, but I'm in charge of preparing them as, say, future psychologists. And so kind of stepping back and saying, okay, here's what I can share is in my profession. Here's what you can do, and here's what you really can't do, and here's what my profession is still grappling with. That's a message that I think is authentic to us. It's relatively easy to discover, and I think it really does come across to students pretty powerfully.
I just wanted to add briefly that great. I love the range of coverage that we just heard from Patty and Michelle. Again, I think if we are truly centering the student experience in our classes, then we are really going to carve out class time to discuss whatever policy it is that we have proposed to get student perspective and voice and input on the policy. I think to Patty's point, we might change our recommendations, our guidelines from assignment to assignment. And I do think it's worth stating here that just because we have a policy doesn't mean that students are going to abide by it. However, it does provide useful guardrails for lots of students who are trying to figure out what is appropriate use, don't want to cross the line. Again, that anxiety of being accused of some kind of inappropriate use. So I believe it's truly a learner-centered practice to figure out, and crucially importantly, take some class time, take some time in your online modules, record some videos to discuss this topic with students.
And that's such an important point, Flower, because I think it's so important to help students understand why you don't want them to use it and when it's okay for them to use it, and to help them have that understanding so that when they're on their own in their own room trying to figure out, should I use AI? Is this going to help my learning or is this going to impede my learning? It's helpful to have those conversations with students and to give them that language. And Flower, can you give a few examples of some student-centered language for using AI?
Yeah, and even before I do that, I'd love to tell just a really quick story about a student who I was talking to, an online PhD student who program has provided, whose instructors are providing some really helpful guidance for a PhD student working on a dissertation, right? And this student was like, well, can I ask AI to create an outline for the literature review? And felt really uncertain about that. So posted the question in the online discussion forum, which is there for Q&A for the whole program. And the one of the lead instructors came back and said, you know what, write the outline yourself first and then get some feedback, right? And that's the kind of clarification that I think lots of us, even sometimes at work, I'm like, is this appropriate or not? How am I representing my true values and communicating? So when I think about student-centered language, my own syllabus has a table, and on one column it says appropriate use of AI for this class, and on the other column it says inappropriate use. And I just have some very straightforward language about, for example, I prefer you to draft the outline yourself first and then get input. And I just have a couple of examples and straightforward languages, pieces of language that are separated into those two columns. That's one way that I've been approaching it.
That's great. Thank you. So given that, what are some practical classroom applications and some safeguards that we can use to help students and ourselves integrate AI responsibly while also protecting both academic and learning integrity?
Well, I'll say I think the number one thing to recognize is what Flower mentioned, right? Is giving it class time. When I was a first year principal, I had a superintendent who said, "Patty, you show people what matters to you by how you spend your money and how you spend your time." And certainly, as educators in a classroom setting, how we spend instructional time speaks volumes to students about what is important to us. So, if it is important to us that they understand what is and is not acceptable, then we have to give it some airtime, right? We have to make room for it. And believe me, I recognize that is a simple statement that is much harder to achieve because there's never enough time. But again, if it's important, we will make time for it. And I think this moment tells us that it is important that we clarify as much as possible. I love, Flower, when you talked about the simple chart that you have, because I think that that becomes a base for people to come back to. And if you can build that together with students, all the better. Let them have a voice in talking about what is and is not. And then you can help them to understand the why of that, which I think maybe Stephanie, you already alluded to, is the importance of that. So that's where I would start.
And
If I,
Stephanie, do you have some
yeah.
things some examples to share and some safeguards that might be helpful?
Oh, for sure. And thanks. I just want to say to everyone, I'm so this conversation, the conversation is validating because I think this is, and I can see the chat, which I just want to give a call out. Thank you all to everybody on the call. It's clear that we're all navigating this space and have these questions even several years later since the dawn, right, of ChatGPT on our lives. And I think it's really important for us to think about what I'm hearing too is being communicative, transparent, and really thoughtful and deliberate on how we're engaging with AI and our students. And also too, I liked, and I'm just appreciative, people are talking about the faculty literacy and our own agility in these spaces. And this is the one thing that continues to resonate with me. And I think, and this is what I've heard from my own students, is that it's interesting. We're in a time where our students, and to the point of so many of the panelists already, is that our students are this is not, they're confused and they're looking for guidance. And that's a big part of what we offer in our classroom spaces. And so I don't think our students are deliberately the majority of our students are trying to deceive the system, right? They're in a time where they're being unfortunately told that we're seeing an erosion of their cognitive confidence. And I think for me, that's what happens in our classroom spaces where we help bolster and elevate that. So for me, I really try to focus on this is keep it local and keep it human. Now, I know that we can't keep, AI, Lori, as you talked about in the beginning of the call, AI is here. It's not like, I mean, I do think about maybe running off into the woods and going off grid, but the reality of that is not reality. And so how do we keep it real? Well, create assignments, learning experiences, assessments that are authentic and real to your community. Thinking about how you're bringing in speakers, you're providing real-time expertise and experience and knowledge and I would say connection points in our classrooms where our students can connect with each other and their communities. And that also then elevates that human piece to what we can do to, again, I know if we're really we want to teach our students, but also thinking about how do we keep that as real and as human as possible. And if we're asking our students to utilize and engage with AI tools, because to Michelle's point, our disciplines and our workspaces and places we can see it's shifting. It's already happening. We need to be able to think about how are we preparing our students. And so I really like to ask my students the why behind their writing, or the why did they choose to use a particular AI tool or technology in this way? And that's also part of what we do in our classes to what we were talking about, being really deliberate and carving out the class time to teach. How do we actually use and engage these tools? And that teacher talk, that's what I like to call it, is I'm actually calling my shots and saying, gosh, this is what I'm thinking as I'm making this decision. So the students can hear my metacognitive processes as well. So those are just, some highlights for me as I try to safeguard. I don't necessarily want to be like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it's really how can we be thoughtful about the integration and I think the application of these tools in our spaces. So that's my first passion points there.
I think those are great points. And if we think one of the recommendations always is to share with students when we use AI. And so that goes back, Stephanie, to your teacher talk and sharing, why did you make this decision to use AI at this point? Anybody have any insights onto other opportunities that we have for students to really learn about how to use AI effectively?
If I could jump in, I'm thinking, I think many of us here have been grappling with how to use AI in ethical and responsible ways to save ourselves time, to your earlier point about the rubric generation. One of the ways that I used the tool when I was teaching my large enrollment social psychology class last fall is I would ask ChatGPT to generate 62 different icebreakers because I had 62 small groups in my large enrollment class. And I had, it was tied to that day's content topic, learning goals. But I just love the ability to differentiate. I think this can be an equity tool that we can put to use where we can tailor scenarios or assignments, even quiz questions to students' own interests. If we take a little bit of time to get to know more about our students, which again is a key teaching practice. So I do think really important to tell our students when and how we're using it. We know that students are getting frustrated by feeling like they're paying tuition and not really getting guidance or expertise from the human expert in the room or in the online class. But I think it can be a time saver. It can be an effective way to increase engagement, and that's a critical goal right now as well.
I think what you're really speaking to, Flower, there is this idea of transparency, right? And that's hard, particularly as educators are learning themselves. I've seen a lot of the comments in the chat that are saying we need education too, right? We need professional learning. Um, and so I think part of being vulnerable to a certain extent with your students is to talk about what you've tried, what has worked, what hasn't, is so important. I think it builds trust with your students so that if a moment comes where you have to push back on use of AI, you're coming from a place of credibility with them because you've built that trust through your transparency. Um, and if you're not sure how to do that, I think the easiest way to do that is to seek out a community that can support you. You know, this conversation is so rich today because each one of us is coming from a different vantage point and can add something. And you've seen us chime in with each other, build off of something that someone else has said. And that's the magic thing that can happen when you put a group of educators together and they can really build off of each other like that. But it can be hard to find that time. So I encourage folks to seek out an online community, whether that's ACUE has their own community. We at Turnitin have an online community. Every major player in the edtech space has a community. So depending on which tools you're using, I would say seek out that community of practice to find your network, to ask your questions, to be vulnerable, to share your learnings with each other, and then bring that into your classroom. In addition to that, I think this level of transparency from the educators is absolutely critical, but I think we're in a moment where transparency around the student process is also absolutely critical, right? How do you get from, first putting pen to paper, which is probably a little antiquated for some folks, fingers to keyboard maybe is the better phrase there, to a final draft? What happens in between? And look, in a former life, I was a high school English teacher. So understanding how students come to their drafting process, what they do as a writer, is really complex. We try to use writing conferences. We look at multiple drafts. We have peer review and the whole writing process, because every stage of that is important. But getting the visibility into how that writing actually takes shape and the choices students are making along the way as writers is frankly challenging. So look for tools that can bring transparency into that process. I'm not one to give you a sales pitch. We've built a tool, Clarity, that allows the educator to see the work developing over time, but certainly there are other tools that can be used in similar ways, even in old school fashion, paper and pencil, to see those drafts emerging. But bringing that transparency into the process opens up the conversation that you can have around, why did you use an AI tool here? To what effect? Was it working? Would you do it again? Those kinds of sort of interrogating the work, if you will, can bring really rich learning opportunities, and I think speak to a number of things we've touched on today. Students' fears can be quelled by bringing more transparency to their writing process and focusing on the process, not just the product. And to be fair, those of us who studied it, writing instruction has advocated for many of these things long before AI arrived on the scene, right? Drafting and using the writing process and revisions, that has always been a part of what we know helps students become stronger writers. But it's even more important today because it really allows you to look at how that work takes shape and to bring a higher level sort of metacognition, your own metacognition, but also push students to think about the choices that they're making. So I would say transparency, transparency, transparency. Whatever tools that you use, bring transparency to the process and make sure that you are looking at the process and not just the product.
I was recently part of a conversation with students about AI, and it was students were saying whether they feel like they should be able to use AI or whether they shouldn't. And one of the students said, well, my father's an accountant and he uses AI all the time. So we need to learn how to use AI in our course. And there was a really robust conversation about that. And one of the students said, but how do you know when AI is right? If you rely on AI from the very beginning. And I thought that was, and I used to use that argument when I taught middle school math. Yes, you can use a calculator, but how do you know if you inputted it correctly? Like, are you getting the right answer? So any other insights into how we can help this idea about using AI in the discipline in the area? Michelle, you talked a little bit about it. Do you
Yeah.
have anything else to add on that?
Well, what Patty said, talking about maybe further extending some of the positive sanctioned uses of AI. So I recently taught for the first time in a very long time one of our introduction to psychology courses at my university. And here's the thing is, yeah, we probably can assume in many courses, students are going to ask AI things. And by the way, this is a little idiosyncratic, but I'm like trying to push, let's say, tell AI instead of ask AI. If you want to ask a simple question, ask Google. It's really great at that. AI does what you tell it to if you're using it right. So anyway, they're going to go in and plug in various things from the course. And so what I did is, I mean, and this is another favorite use of mine. It's not the most glamorous, but it's one where there's some interesting research starting to build up in this area, which is custom chatbots or custom GPTs, which believe me, just in something like ChatGPT, if I can build it, anybody can build it. So it was a good experience for me and a positive for the students. So there was a course associated bot for the class. And how is this different than, oh, I went and just put it all in AI myself? Well, we had an open source textbook. So it's got your textbook. I did a comprehensive study guide for the entire semester from start to finish. Like here's all the concepts that are going to be covered. It had that. And I could do a few other little fancy things like for students who express distress in my discipline. We know as insiders, this is something we have to get out ahead of in Psych 101. We hear, I'm in this class and I have this issue. And so instead of a generic, like, well, go get help someplace, this is specific to the university and it flags, and we trained it how to respond to certain kinds of distress. So things like that. And it even took on yet another perhaps unpopular opinion here, but in my field, we have pretty roundly debunked the idea of learning styles, which students come to us with. And I'm like, well, I'm a visual learner, so what am I going to do in this class? And so I gave my bot access to a few articles first and trained it to gently and positively say, actually, if the student is asking about that, give them a little bit of facts and then take them right into something. So it pushed them towards retrieval practice. Another thing that we are content, it's a powerful, don't just read the stuff. Yes, I can summarize it for you, but let's answer some questions now and even try to draw them after that into more complex applications. This was voluntary. No student had to do this. And that was another overarching frame of this course is autonomy and choice, as we also say in my field. So lots of choices students were making. It's like, okay, you can read the book, you can do the study guide, you can print it all out on paper if you want. The one thing I will not do is lecture on every single concept. You got to get it somewhere, but hey, here is this option. And so for some students, that was a good thing. And it taught me to create agents. And that's another kind of little tip and trick that I'd love to share with my fellow faculty is I said, well, this is actually a lot more useful than just kind of randomly plugging my own queries into chat. Like, okay, I need an active learning exercise. What do I do now? I have different assistants. I'm a little strange this way, but I name them. Makes them easier to keep straight. So one who knows all about nonfiction writing and helps me with my editorial tasks, one that has a lot of context for all my faculty work, including my teaching, and so on. So I think that's a really kind of a good way to go about it. I learned about it through that. I even set up it, kind of for myself and fellow faculty, a little chat bot that tackles critical thinking, but again, with concepts specifically from my research in my field. So this, again, the simplest, least glamorous of tools can uncover a wealth of positive approaches here. So I challenge everybody, think about if you're just sitting there going, well, I would do this if only I had the money, the time, and so on. My students always hit a wall at this point in the semester. Zero in on that and see what you can do, and then build your skills while you're doing it.
I love the complexity and the nuance that you're adding here, Michelle. Thank you. I resonated with a comment that you made about if I can do it, then anybody can do it. That's encouraging. Love the challenge. I do want to come back to just one other aspect of sort of classroom application and safeguard, Lori, and then I'll just turn it back over to you, or whoever wants to jump in. I'm thinking about a comment that I saw in the chat. It's hard to keep up. I'm thrilled with the robust conversation, but one comment jumped out, and I think it's a theme that we have not necessarily voiced yet, and we need to. I think a critically important learning objective in all of our curricula now is to cultivate a healthy skepticism in our students as engaged citizens of this polarized democracy. We have to teach people, not just students, to slow down, to stop, to fact check, to assess the validity, the authenticity of anything that we see or hear online or in an audio format. I'll draw the line here. I think we're all human in this particular experience, but other than that, anything you see and hear online or on audio that's digital, I just feel like it's critically important to cultivate that ability to stop and think. And that's a critically important job skill, right? We see headlines about people who put out information that is not accurate and their name is attached to it. And that can have all kinds of negative consequences for their career. But generally speaking, for societal good, let's please cultivate the process, the aspect of stopping and checking. And that in itself can be a built-in task of any assignment that you ask students to use AI. It should be, right? Use AI and then check and verify. I think that's a really critically important life and workplace skill now.
Great point. And you're right about the robust conversation that's happening in the chat. I do want to make sure we save it because I see the comments coming up and I'm like, oh, wow, I want to learn more about that. But no, I'm supposed to be moderating this chat. So yes, it is very interesting. And now I'd like to turn to some questions that we've received from our participants here. One is, how do you address the use of AI in an online course, particularly an asynchronous course? What are any recommendations, any suggestions for using AI effectively in an online course or addressing the use of AI effectively in an online course? Anybody want to take that?
I'll start it off just briefly. I'm not sure my recommendations are all that different than my recommendations in an in-person environment. How you do it is different, but the actual what of it, I think is the same. You have to give classroom time or classroom instructional time to it. You have to make space for practice and trial and error. You have to make your thinking visible to students. You have to push students to use the tools, to question the tools, to Flower's point. But all of those things I think are still a part of what you'll do. You need to recognize, process, and build in transparency. That actually may be more important in an online course in that you want things to be visible. So you have to think about, how can I see the work developing instead of only seeing the product? And I'm not minimizing that. I'm not suggesting that's easy, but I think that there are ways that you can do that, where you are focused on the process and that you get more insight and visibility and transparency into the choices that students are making, as opposed to just getting a finished product and then, having to go from there, and that being sort of a tiny, tiny artifact, if you will. So I think you do have to broaden the data points and the artifacts that you can bring in so that you have more visibility. But overall, I'd say most of the things that we've said today apply in person or online.
Thank you. Anybody else like to add anything to that? Or shall we go on to the next question? Flower, I see you unmuting.
Well, and I also saw Stephanie. I love this little game that we played. I'll keep it short, and Stephanie, if you want to add anything. But I would say the exact same thing as Patty has said. A lot of our recommendations for teaching for authentic learning apply in online classes as well. We have not mentioned, I think, the bugaboo of agentic AI and asynchronous online classes. That is a problem. That is a challenge. I don't want to pretend it's not happening. I do believe that when we double down on what we know about learning theory and emotion science and motivation science, that when we build trust, when we cultivate caring, when we create learning experiences that are meaningful and relevant, when we do those kinds of things, I think it reduces the temptation for students to use agents to complete online classes or whatever else. But it's not a great solution. I'm thinking that we're in kind of a strange moment right now, and that more regulations, legislation such will be coming to help us address this from a technological standpoint. Right now, I'm doubling down on inspiring students to do the work for themselves, partly related to the skills that they're going to need in a job, right? If we talk to our students in an online class as well about needing to be able to complete a job interview with what they have here, that can be motivating as well. So just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. Yes, motivating students to do the work of the learning. The work of learning is critical. A slightly different question, but one that came up from one of our participants. What is your take on a university-wide AI use policy? Does that take away from faculty freedom to educate, or is it a better standard to ensure students are held to the same standards from course to course? University-wide AI policies. What are your thoughts on that? Stephanie, you want to start?
Sure. And I just want to say yes, yes, yes to what to the last responses of that question. And I think, and then again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience and as a faculty member, and then what I'm hearing from colleagues around the world is that it's a yes and. I think I think it is important for universities to provide guidelines. I think we want to be mindful, as we talk about policy and guidance and how that plays into faculty autonomy. And going back to as we started our webinar today, that it is so assignment driven. It is discipline specific. It is based on your own personal philosophy or what might be taking place in a particular class. So I think it's important that the university provides guidelines and support education for faculty and students in terms of building their literacy in this space. I think though, and then this is what I'm finding and then how I'm supporting faculty is, and to Michelle's point, go to the department, to the discipline. What do they feel that they need to come to consensus on in terms of particular policy and guidance? Because that is the next step versus, I would say, university wide. I think for a university to be silent speaks volumes, and so we want to be very mindful about that as well.
Yeah, everything that Stephanie just advocated for. I mean, I think practically speaking, institutions that are going to do well with more universal policies are the ones that align those very closely to the values of the institution and what brings everybody there to begin with. And if it aligns with that, then I think you're going to reach that point. I also kind of, as a going on 30-year faculty member myself, I say, well, okay, if we could actually have some consensus, then that's a rare, wonderful thing, and let's go with it. And so maybe when I think at university, yeah, when I think university policy, I think more of, okay, what's never okay? It's never all right to talk about essentially what Flower brought up, which was to send an agent into your Canvas course and go around doing things. That's never all right. It's never okay to post something that's a personal discussion board post and it's all composed and you didn't even look at it, and etc. That we can establish. And then we've got the richness of, well, what do we need to do and want to do? And that bubbles up from the disciplines. And I say, let's not forget at many universities, a very powerful level here is essentially the college level. So social and behavioral sciences, for example, I'm really looking forward to helping spark some of these conversations to say, if you have a social behavioral sciences degree, you should know and be able to do, and then iterate that on out. As to, should AI be in any class? When we get out into those more edge cases, I don't know that we want to pursue that. But yes, to the extent that we can rally around a few, like, all right, nobody likes this, then we can proceed from there.
Those are like what I call our non-negotiables, and deciding on what those are, I think is really critical.
Great. Thank you. This next question that came in is of real concern to me and interest to me, and I'd like to be very selfish here and get some feedback from the panelists on it. And that is, I'm concerned about the excessive punitive response instead of an opportunity of a teachable moment when a student is caught using AI. I was just reading an article where the author was promoting this sort of stepped response when AI is identified that a student has been using AI, and that it's not no credit on the assignment starting from the beginning. One of the steps was to have the students engage with the Learning Center to have a conversation about why they felt they needed to use AI. And I thought that was fascinating. Were they short on time? Well, then the student needs help with scheduling out assignments and breaking assignments up and helping with that. Did they not understand the directions? How can they use AI to help them better understand the directions? Any thoughts on that type of teachable and some ways that institutions and faculty may be able to implement teachable moments rather than the more punitive moments of AI use?
I'd like to share the example of an instructor that I met who teaches fully online asynchronous, and I loved his mindset, and that was to plan in advance for the time that it takes to have those conversations. Now, I want to qualify this comment because I was engaging a little bit in the chat and people were saying, well, sure, unless you're an adjunct and you don't get paid anything. And I was like, I know, I've taught adjunct for 30 years. I get it. But I love this instructor's take on setting himself and his students up for success. For example, he does not have a major writing assignment that is due 2 weeks before the end of class because maybe you need to meet with students and discuss what did tempt them to maybe use this in a way that wasn't appropriate, and then discuss with the students what is an appropriate way forward. Do you resubmit? Do you sit in my office with your laptop with no Wi-Fi? What is the appropriate way to overcome this hurdle? So I liked his take on planning in advance for the time that this takes, with full understanding that not everybody has that kind of time, especially if you're teaching a larger enrollment class or you're getting paid as part-time wages, those kinds of things. None of my solutions here today are perfect, but they are I hope steps in the right direction.
If I could jump in, I really appreciate what Flower said. And I think I had a colleague say to me once, have the conversation before you need to have the conversation. And I think that really resonates with me. And it goes back to even what we talked about earlier. You building a learning community built on transparency and trust is the first gateway into when these situations arise. Because I will tell you, since the first semester that this came out, this is happening every semester, right? The conversations continue to come up. It's not like, oh, everybody figured it out. I mean, in fact, it's becoming more important for us to have these teachable moments. And it comes back to that we're modeling. We are providing, again, that I said, that teacher talk. We're asking our students to be thoughtful about how they're feeling about their own efficacy as learners. And so building trust, relationships, really being thoughtful about the authentic assessment design that you are putting into your classes, what you're asking your students to do and why. I think all of that is really beneficial. I do believe, I mean, again, I share this story and I'm mindful of our time, but when I was an undergrad in college, I was in a sorority. And I can remember one of the very first introductions to the sorority house I had was the basement, where all the file cabinets were that you could pull out filled with exams, right? You just go downstairs, Econ 101. Sorry, Michelle, Psych 101, right? You could just pick, but it was what would happen in that moment. And it goes back to what happens when you make that decision to potentially cheat. I'm mindful about using that word, but or use resources that you know aren't in the best interest of yourself as a learner. So how do we create learning environments where our students feel that that isn't necessarily the way out? And so I think I'm really passionate about this because the majority of our students come to our courses and to our universities and colleges because they want to learn. It is part of the human experience. And so how do we nurture and facilitate that? And that's more of an open-ended question for all of us, I think.
I don't know that there's a whole lot to add, but I do have one tidbit that I want to chime in with. This is part of the reason that I so often talk about that process approach, because I think when you wait until that final product, that it is very easy to jump to a punitive response because, you're at the end, and if whatever mistakes may have been made along the way, again, assuming positive intent that it was a mistake and not intentional misconduct. Um, if they're at that final product, it's much, much harder to stop it there and to respond in any way that isn't punitive. It's still possible, but it's harder. If you are seeing the work evolve over time, if you are looking at the process and you have that level of transparency that I've alluded to previously, it's a lot easier to jump in a formative way. Why did you make this decision? Why are you, it looks like you've used an AI tool, you've copied in a lot of text here. Why are you making that choice? What drove you to, is because you don't feel confident to speak to this yourself, right? Those become formative learning conversations as opposed to that. It's the final due date. You've submitted something to me, and I believe that you've used AI in an unethical way. That's an entirely different conversation. So I think you have to design the learning experience to build in that process along the way. And again, just like everyone who's spoken before me, I am not at all assuming that everyone has time to do all of this because I understand that there's a trade-off there. And maybe that's a separate conversation for us to have around AI tools that educators use, right? To give back some of this time that allows you to have these conversations and these formative learning opportunities along the way. And again, there's no perfect solution, and there's a lot more to be learned over time. But certainly, if you design intentionally with a formative process in mind, it is a lot easier to get there than if you are focused on that final product and then suddenly something happens that sends things off the rails.
Thank you, Patty. And I hate doing this, but we are at time for our conversation with our panel. Please join me in thanking them for their insightful conversation. And wish we could keep it going. And I wish we could keep the chat going, but we are at time. And I'd like to turn it back to Alyssa to wrap us up here.
Thank you, Lori, and to our incredible panelists. This was such an insightful discussion. If you all are interested in deepening your understanding of AI and how to use it responsibly in your classroom, ACUE offers several AI quick studies that can be taken in just a few hours. In addition, you can earn points by joining ACUE webinars and quick studies, and that will go towards your AI and higher ed endorsement, which you can get through ACUE Commons. So if you'd like to learn more about this, you can just reach out to partnerships@acue.org, or you can go to acue.org and look for ACUE Commons. Thank you, everyone. This is such an important conversation, and I hope that we get to see you in our next webinar. Thank you all.